All right, welcome everyone. We'll give everybody a few seconds to get logged in. Well, it is 1 o'clock, so let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon and welcome to the Animas Museum second Saturday seminar series for March. My name is Susan Jones. I'm on the board of directors here at the La Plata County Historical Society. 50 years ago, actually on March 24th, 1972, a meeting was held here at the Durango Public Library of a group of like-minded people who wanted to keep La Plata County history and culture alive for present and future generations. That was the beginning of what would become the La Plata County Historical Society. 50 years later, we're still hanging on, running a museum even, and now we're celebrating our golden anniversary. To commemorate this event, one of the things we wanted to do was take a look at the early days of the county, which coincidentally started with a gold rush. So we asked Charles D. Ferdinando to do some research for us, and he found a story that is quite fascinating and definitely overflows an hour. So this will be a two-part story. But you know, if you love history and you don't know Charlie, well, you should. Charlie is a fifth generation Durango native, Durango High School graduate, and Fort Lewis College graduate as well. And he was in at the beginning when Durango started thinking about preserving its history and starting a museum. He's the one that rebuilt the Joy Cabin on the museum grounds. So now we're open, you can visit it or virtually on our website if you want to. He was the lead narrator for the Durango and Silverton Railroad's onboard historical narration program. So he's done this a lot. And today, if you come visit the museum, you can meet Charlie since he's in charge of our visitor services and is a wonderful resource for all of us. Before I turn it over to Charlie, a little bit of Zoom housekeeping. Again, we're using the Zoom webinar feature, which means that you're all muted and your videos are off. At the bottom of the screen, you may mouse down a little bit. There are some icons. To minimize distractions today, we have disabled the chat. So if you do have an immediate issue or question, please check on the Q&A icon and we'll be monitoring that. At the end of the talk, we'll open it up for questions. So you can either type them into the Q&A and we'll answer them at the end, or at the end, you can click the little hand icon and we'll allow you to unmute and ask your question. This session is being recorded and you will receive an email in 24 hours with a link to the recording. And with that, here's Charlie.
Welcome, everybody. It's good to spend some time with you this afternoon. Hopefully, you'll learn a few facts that maybe you didn't know. So let's get started. This is titled Gold Rush to the La Platas. So the first slide here, we have a section from what I think is referred to as the Miera map. We can't talk about a gold rush unless we talk about the early European exploration of the area, which was done by the Spanish. They were the first map makers. And in this section of the map, you can see the Rio de los Animas River. And then a little bit to the left of the Animas is the Rio de San Joaquin and the Rio de Lazario. The Rio de Joaquin today is known as the La Plata River, and the Rio de Lazario is the Mancos River. If you notice on this map, the Spanish indicated the native people that were living here, and in about the center of this section of the map, you'll see some teepee structures, and those are Ute Indian camps that the Spanish encountered. And then, again, this entire area was occupied by the Ute people when the first Europeans began exploring. The first explorations into the area were done by Juan de Rivera and he conducted at least 3 expeditions into the area between 1761 and 1765. Later, there was a later expedition, which is referred to as the Dominguez and Escalante expedition. That was in 1776. And that's why we have Escalante Middle School, because it's located close to the Animas River, where that expedition supposedly crossed the Animas River. Let's go to the next slide. This is just a little bit of an enlargement of the previous slide. And over to the right, above the mountains there, you'll see a notation, Sierra de la Plata. So the Spanish were the ones that named the La Plata Mountains. And again, we have the Rio San Joaquin, which later was known as the La Plata River. Let's go to the, well, wait a minute, just a second. These maps, again, were made by the early Spanish. And again, that started very early. When we get into the 1820s, there were fur trappers and traders coming through this area. They were using the trails that the Spanish had used. These trails were used even by Kit Carson through the 1830s and 1840s. Part of the Dominguez and Escalante expedition, the reason for it was to find a trade route from Santa Fe to Monterey, California, which eventually they did develop that trade route, and it was called the Old Spanish Trail. So that trail was used for many, many years. In 1848, John Charles Fremont, who was the son-in-law of Senator Thomas Hart Benton of Missouri, led an expedition into the area trying to find a railroad route along the 38th parallel. That expedition really was a disaster. They took a wrong turn up in the San Juan Mountains. They got trapped up there in 10 feet of snow at 12,000 feet above elevation, above sea level, and had 20 below zero weather, and 10 people in that expedition died before they were rescued. There wasn't another major expedition until the summer of 1859, when Captain John M. Maycomb of the Topographical Corps was sent north from Santa Fe along the Old Spanish Trail through the Sierra de la Platas. He was sent over to the San Juan River. His report after that expedition said that the terrain was much too difficult for roads or railroads, and the weather was too severe for any type of permanent settlement. So there isn't another sort of expedition into the area again of any consequence until about the summer of 1860, when Captain John Moss brought a party of people into the Animas Valley, and they explored, and they probably went west over into what's La Plata Canyon, and they probably explored the La Platas also. Let's go to the next slide. This is a picture of John Moss and a Native American person who we believe is probably from the Mojave tribe. John Moss we're sort of going to concentrate on John Moss today because he played a big part in continuing the gold rush to the La Platas. In the spring of 1873, well, let's go back just a little, sorry. Let's talk a little bit more about John Moss. John Thomas Moss was born in Utica, New York on March the 4th of 1839. He was baptized and brought up in the Episcopal Church. His father was a very active Mason. In the spring of 1854, His father went out to Iowa from New York and took up a claim, and he took up a claim in Delaware County, Iowa, and built a cabin. And he sent for his family the following spring. In 1856, the family moved from their original homestead to Mitchell County, Iowa. In the fall of 1857, John Moss was 18 years old and went west for the first time. When he came to Iowa, he was very interested by Native people. He had a big interest with them, and whenever they were around, he spent time with them and began learning their language. And he became multilingual by the time he was a young adult. And again, when he was 18 years old, he left Iowa for the first time and went west. And he probably went west because he had an older brother who had gone to California in the gold rush of 1849. His brother became an agent for the government. And so the story goes that John Moss himself was a Pony Express rider for probably a short amount of time. But he stayed in the West. He got involved with Native people wherever he went. Again, he was multilingual. In the 1860 census, though, he is still listed as living with his parents in Iowa, but he may have been traversing back and forth to Iowa from the West. But anyway, he spent most of his time in the West. And in 1864, he was appointed the agent for the Mojave Indians of Arizona. The Mojave Reservation straddled Western Arizona, Eastern California, and the tip of Nevada. And so he was very much involved with Native people. And in this picture, you can see he looks much like a fur trapper. He's wearing buckskins and so forth. And this is probably during his tenure as an agent with the Mojave people. Moss was a promoter. He was a likable person. Everyone that writes about him says he seemed to be very charismatic and likable, but he was also self-promoting, and he was not free of scandal. About this time, he was involved with the Mojave Indians. He was also moving around, and there are stories that he was involved in what was known as the Great Colorado Diamond Swindle, which took place up in northeastern Colorado on the Wyoming border. And I won't go into that, but it sort of tainted his reputation for a while. It involved some people who were trying to convince investors that there were diamonds and other precious gems in that area that you could just pick up off the ground. But what they had done is gone up there and salted the area with diamonds that they had bought, and then they got investors and of course took them for every cent they had. And this included investors from San Francisco, from New York. It involved the Tiffany jewelry family. It also included investors from England and other parts of Europe. So we won't go into that anymore, but he had this reputation sort of hanging over him. In the spring of 1873, John Moss had been employed by the Parrott brothers of California to act as an agent to come to Colorado and look for mining investment opportunities. And so in the spring of 1873, John Moss is over in Del Norte, Colorado, on the other side of the Continental Divide. And he meets up with 4 prospectors The four prospectors were Almerian Root, Alex K. Fleming, Robert Jones, and Henry Leitner. And they had been over in the La Plata Mountains on the La Plata River, and they had located a claim that they called the Comstock Mine. But they didn't have any money to develop it. So they had staked their claim and gone back to Del Norte to try to look for people with money that would help them develop their claim. And while they were there, they ran into John Moss, and he was very much interested in their story and decided to come with them back to the La Plata Mountains and check out the possibilities of maybe investing. So in July of 1873, well, earlier than that, John Moss comes with these four prospectors back to the La Platas. He picks up some ore samples and maybe a little free gold that they found in the La Plata River. And he immediately leaves for San Francisco to have a conference with the Parrott brothers to see if they will finance some mining activity in the La Platas. In July of 1873, Moss returns with a small group of men from San Francisco. He did receive funding from the Parrott brothers, and he returns with James Ratliff, A.L. Root, Dick Giles, and you may recognize that name because later in our history of the county, Dick Giles plays a part. There was a Henry Lee and Ed Merrick, a John Brewer, a Fred Banks, and several others. They traveled southeast from San Francisco to the Colorado River near Fort Mojave, where they crossed the river. Then they came across northern Arizona to the San Juan River. They crossed the San Juan River and then up the Mancos River to Navajo Draw. And then they made their way up over what is called Aztec Divide. And when you get up on the top of Aztec Divide, it looks out over a vast valley. And the story goes that as soon as Moss saw this valley, he exclaimed that this should be known as the Montezuma Valley. Now, whether there's any much truth to that, but there's several references that Moss named the Montezuma Valley. They again brought supplies, and they began some initial locating along the La Plata River and into La Plata Canyon. But in these early days, mostly what they were interested in were not hard rock mines. They were looking at the placer beds, the gravel and sand bars in the river. They were thinking about how gold was discovered in California, which was placer mining. In other words, the simplest form of placer mining is panning for gold. When you get into it a little more, you use sluicing. You have to have water to wash the gravel and sands, and you're looking for free gold that is deposited in those sand and gravel deposits. And so initially that's what they did. And they located what was known as the California Bar on the La Plata River. And there are actually placer deposits all the way down the La Plata River to where it runs into the San Juan River. But they were concentrating on the area near the mouth of La Plata Canyon. Of course, they did not spend the winter of 1873. They didn't have many supplies, so they left for the winter. And then again in 1874, they returned and they went up the La Plata River. And again, they were prospecting in behalf of the Parrott brothers and other investors who had sunk money into this proposition. Now, all those gentlemen who had originally come the year before in 1873, as soon as they saw the Montezuma Valley, they all decided to stake claims for ranches in that area, and they literally stayed. They staked land for ranches, but then they also prospected. John Moss, because he was so familiar with the Indians and the language and so forth, did not trust the federal government to negotiate any type of treaties with the native people. So John Moss himself works out a treaty, a personal treaty with the Ute people in the area to try to protect his investment and the people who had come with him to prospect. They had built, when instead of wintering over in La Plata Canyon, they spent the winter of 1874 over in the Mancos Valley. And Moss left to get supplies to resupply. One of the gentlemen that was involved, the Mr. Giles, while Moss was gone to get supplies, he was cleaning a gun or had some type of accident and shot himself in the neck, and he couldn't be moved. So that's one of the reasons they spent the winter in the Mancos Valley until he could recuperate, and he did recuperate. And they were camped along a small creek, which they named Starvation Creek, because the people that were waiting for Moss to return almost starved before he got back with supplies. And I haven't looked on a map, but supposedly Starvation Creek still exists over there north of Mancos. Let's go to the next slide. Here we have a picture of a typical Ute encampment. You can see teepees there. We're not exactly sure where this picture was taken, but again, Moss made every effort to be friendly with the Utes, to communicate with them, and to negotiate safe passage when he was on their land, because this was still Ute reservation land. There had been no effort to seek a treaty that would allow mining in those early days. Let's go to the next slide. John Moss sought out Chief Ignacio. This is a picture of Chief Ignacio. He was the chief of the bands that were in the area of the La Platas, and Moss communicated with him and again negotiated a personal treaty to ensure safe passage and permission to do further exploration in the area of the La Platas. Let's go to the next slide. Here's just another view of Chief Ignacio. Later, you will see pictures of Chief Ignacio, and he's wearing a badge. He became, he had a title as Indian Police, and so a lot of pictures show him wearing a law enforcement badge. Let's go to the next slide. Here's another picture of John Moss, and we believe this was taken in the summer of 1874 by William Henry Jackson. In the year 1873, 1874, and 1875, William Henry Jackson was involved with the U.S. Geological Survey of this part of the country. And the survey was led by, it's known as the Hayden Survey, Um, and William Henry Jackson was the official photographer for the expedition. Part of the expedition, another gentleman on the expedition was a man by the name of Ernest Ingersoll, who was a correspondent for the New York Tribune newspaper. But on the muster rolls of the Hayden survey, he's listed as a naturalist. But he really was a reporter looking for a good story that he could send back to his newspaper. Well, in the summer of 1874, it was getting towards the end of the season, and the Hayden survey was camped up in Baker's Park, which is where Silverton is located. And they were camping one night, and a pack train came through, and they stopped for the night. And the pack train was headed for La Plata Canyon and John Moss's prospecting party. The pack train was being operated by a man by the name of E.H. Cooper. And William Henry Jackson asked Cooper to spend the night at their camp. And he immediately recognized Cooper because he had met Cooper the previous year in Omaha, Nebraska. Again, Cooper was freighting from Omaha all the way out here into the San Juans the earlier year. So over the campfire that night, as they ate their meal, E.H. Cooper starts telling William Henry Jackson and Ernest Ingersoll about John Moss and the activity in the La Plata Mountains. And he started telling them stories about ancient ruins of a prehistoric civilization in that area. And this piqued Ernest Ingersoll's interest, and also William Henry Jackson. William Henry Jackson was looking for more things to photograph and ways to expand the Hayden survey. And Ingersoll was just looking for a good story, and he thought those ancient ruins, of course, would do well in the New York newspapers. So Ingersoll convinces William Henry Jackson that they should take a few days and head south from Baker's Park down to the La Plata Mountains. And E.H. Cooper tells them that John Moss knows that area like the back of his hand, and that he would act as a guide for them to show them the ruins, etc. And he would also show him the prospecting that they were doing on the La Plata River. So this picture was probably taken by William Henry Jackson that summer of 1874. William Henry Jackson and Ingersoll and two other men and pack animals with the camera equipment start heading south the next day from Baker's Park. And as they get further down the Animas Valley, they're intercepted by John Moss because Cooper had set out ahead and had got down to the La Platas and run into John Moss, and he told them, Cooper told Moss that William Henry Jackson and part of the Hayden survey might be on the way. So Moss rode out to intercept them and to welcome them. Because again, John Moss saw this as an opportunity to promote his mining interests in the La Platas. So anyway, let's go to the next slide. These are two maps of Colorado. Over to the left is the 1874 map. This is before statehood, and this is the configuration of the counties during the late territorial period. And if you notice down there in the lower left corner is a very large La Plata County. Well, La Plata County doesn't look like that today. And on the map over to the right, this is the 1876 map of Colorado. And you can see that La Plata County was subdivided and they created a new county called San Juan County to the north. And in later times, the two counties would be subdivided again. But this is just to give you an idea of what La Plata County looked like in this time period. Let's go. Oh, hold on there just a second. In 1874, the county seat for La Plata County was at Howardsville, which was up the Animas River north of present-day Silverton. In 1876, a town called Parrott City gets started on the La Plata River by John Moss. And on June the 12th of 1876, that town was organized and they had the first county election on October the 3rd, 1876. And it becomes then the county seat for La Plata County. Let's go to the next slide. In that election of 1876, on October 3rd, 1876, that's when they elected county commissioners, the first representative, et cetera. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. This map is a section from a much larger map that was drawn by a man by the name of Emil Fisher. And this map dates from 1893, which is much later than the period we're talking about. But I chose this map because it clearly shows the Animas River and the La Plata Mountains, and it shows the La Plata River and Junction Creek and so forth, but it's hard to see. But over towards the sort of lower center of this map, down towards where Hesperus would be, it shows Parrott City, and it also shows a place called Gold Bar. Gold Bar was downstream from the site of Parrott City, and Gold Bar was a placer deposit on the La Plata River. And that's where one of the first camps was that Moss had located. But in 1874, they went upstream above where Parrott City would eventually be located. And when William Henry Jackson first encountered John Moss, the camp was north of the site that would become Parrott City. So let's go to the next slide. So during that summer of 1874, or late fall of 1874, William Henry Jackson and Ingersoll are guided by John Moss. He shows them what they're doing as far as prospecting in the La Platas, but then he takes them down the Mancos River and down the Mancos Valley to show them some of the ancient ruins. And they eventually make their way all the way down to the San Juan. And William Henry Jackson takes some of the first photographs of these ancient dwellings that were scattered in the lower Mancos Valley. And it's such an important find that William Henry Jackson convinces the Hayden Survey to allow him to come back in the summer of 1875 so he can complete a loop over into what's now Hovenweep and so forth, and so he can document other ancient dwellings and so forth. So this picture here is probably one of the first pictures actually taken in the new town of Parrot City. And you can see these gentlemen are posed for the photo, and behind them is a tent, just a canvas tent. But over to the right is a new structure that's actually built with sawn boards. So this is taken after the arrival of the first sawmill. And the gentleman that's leaned up against the shed there, smoking, looks like he's smoking a corncob pipe. That is probably Mr. Lee, who ends up being the guide for the Hayden survey in the summer of 1875. William Henry Jackson returns, but when he gets to Parrot City, or the camp, John Moss meets him and says that he is on his way back to California to meet with the Parrot brothers to try to secure more funding for his enterprise, and that John Lee will be as good a guide as Moss to take him the rest of the way down through the Indian ruins and so forth. Let's go to the next slide. This is a picture of an early sawmill. This is not the first sawmill in La Plata County, but we don't have a picture of it. So this is a sawmill that was actually over towards Pagosa Springs, but it's the same time period, and it illustrates what a sawmill would have looked like in those early days. So in 1875, in the spring, several gentlemen decide that with the activity in the La Plata Canyon and the founding of a new town, that you can't have a town without buildings, and you need lumber to build buildings. So three gentlemen, a gentleman by the name of Scott and Ely, and this E.H. Cooper, who again had been a freighter and a packer in the area in earlier years. They bring in the first sawmill, and they bring it in from the south. They hire a freighter by the name of Jesse Love, who used 10 yoke of oxen and two freight wagons and a crew of 10 men to move the equipment for the first sawmill. And they have to cross the San Juan River. Of course, in the spring, the river was running high, and the wagons overturned in the San Juan River. They had to unhitch the 10 yoke of oxen and get the oxen out of the river so that they wouldn't drown. And then they had to dive into the river, and they hired to recover the sawmill equipment, and they hired Navajos who actually helped recover the sawmill equipment from the San Juan River to get it on shore. And then they continued freighting it up the La Plata River to the site that's currently occupied about where Hesperus is. And they set the sawmill up and began sawing lumber to build the new town of Parrot City. One of the gentlemen that helped in the freighting of that sawmill was a man by the name of William Valiant. And he was hired by Jesse Love as part of the freighting crew. But he was also a carpenter and a mill worker. And so he helped set up the sawmill. And once the sawmill was producing lumber, John Moss hired him and others to start building the town that became Parrot City. And he spent the summer of 1875 constructing buildings, and he made all of the doors and windows by hand for the buildings in the new town of Parrot City. He was also hired by Moss to build a wooden flume to divert water from the La Plata River into the placer operations to wash sand and gravel deposits. But that didn't work out. Now, I mentioned earlier, well, and in that summer of 1875, they built a courthouse, they built a jail, a two-story hotel, they built a number of stores and a number of houses. And again, William Valiant made all the windows and doors for those structures. And he was supposed to be paid by the Parrott Company, and John Moss issued him checks for payment. And we'll talk a little bit more about that a little later. But eventually, William Valiant moves on to the Animas Valley and is part of the beginnings of Animas City. Let's go to the next slide. Here's an early illustration of Parrott City. And in the center of the picture, this illustration was drawn by Emil Fisher, who was also a map maker, but he also did other illustrations. This is probably based on a photograph taken by William Henry Jackson. And in the center of the picture there, you sort of see a broad street, and there's a tall building at the end of that street. And that was the building that housed the courthouse and John Moss's offices. Let's go to the next slide. Here's another picture taken by William Henry Jackson in the summer of 1875. And this shows some of the placer operations on or near the La Plata River. You can see where they've diverted stream water there into a crude sluice box. They were shoveling sand and gravel into that sluice box to be washed. And again, they're looking for free gold. In the earliest placer mining that they did, they were using gold pans. But as the placer mining developed, they again started using these sluice boxes and other technology. But again, it involved washing gravel and sand deposits, and they were looking for free gold that would be deposited in those gravel deposits. And some of that lumber to build those early sluice boxes was actually hand cut using whip saws. This would have been before the sawmill was in operation. Let's go to the next slide. Here's one of the early residents of Parrott City. This is a gentleman by the name of Charles Neglin, but he went by Charlie. He came from Herman, Missouri, and he did prospecting in the upper San Juan Mountains up around Baker's Park before coming down to the La Plata Mountains. But he saw the activity in the La Platas as maybe being an opportunity that he could ply his trade, which was a blacksmith, but he could also do some prospecting. Let's go to the next slide. This is Charlie's brother, Bill or William Neglin. They both did prospecting again up in the upper San Juans, and then they saw opportunity in the new town of Parrott City and moved down there, and they became employed by John Moss for the Parrott Company, and they were supposed to dig a diversion ditch to supply water from the La Plata River to the flumes and sluice boxes that were part of the placer mining operation. Let's go to the next slide. Here's an actual photograph of Parrott City, probably in the fall of 1875. And again, this is most likely a photo taken by William Henry Jackson. And again, the earlier illustration by Emil Fisher probably was based on this photograph. And again, you see a broad street lined with buildings on both sides, and up at the head of that street is a larger building, and that again is what was the courthouse. And the new town of Parrott City, it got a post office designation in 1876, the year probably after this photograph was taken. Let's move on to the next slide. Here's a great picture showing a close-up of one of those structures in Parrott City. This is most likely the building that housed the courthouse and also John Moss's office. And this is taken, this image is from a stereo, what was called a stereo card. And it's just one half of the stereo card. But these two gentlemen, on the left is Oliver Holmes, and on the right is Thomas Rayleigh. We're not sure what happened to Oliver Holmes, but on the 1885 Colorado census, Thomas Rayleigh is listed as living in La Plata City, which comes a little bit later, further up La Plata Canyon. Let's move on to the next slide. Here's a famous studio portrait of John Moss himself. This was actually taken in a photo studio in Pueblo, and at some point it was reproduced by the Boston studio in early Durango. But on the copy of the picture we have, you can see the information from the Pueblo studio and the Boston studio. We're getting close to time here, but I'm going to just tell you a little bit more. In that first election of October 3rd, 1876, they elected, of course, the county commissioners and the county clerk and so forth, but they also elected the first state representative to the legislature. And guess who gets elected? None other than John Moss. He was the money behind Parrott City, and he was the conduit for money between the Parrott brothers and other investors in California, and everything that was happening in the La Plata Mountains and Parrott City. So he's elected in that election, October 3rd, 1876. He becomes our first state representative to the new state legislature. Before he leaves Parrott City to go to the first legislative session, he marries a young woman named Elida Olson in Parrott City. Her aunt ran a boarding house in Parrott City at the time. She was, Elida was considered the belle of Parrott City. Every man had their eye on Elida. So John Moss convinces her, and that is the first recorded marriage in La Plata County, in the county seat of Parrott City. John Moss supposedly was married twice before, and but we're not entirely sure if he was married once or twice, but Elida supposedly was his third wife. The legislative session was scheduled to begin in January in Denver. Elida and John Moss leave Parrott City for Denver. He shows up in Denver, sets up an office in Denver in a saloon. He attends, some accounts say he attended the first two sessions of the legislature. Other accounts say he didn't attend any. But he soon abandons his job as a representative, and he and Elida leave Denver and head to San Francisco. In all of this, the Parrott brothers had withdrawn their financial support. They had gotten suspicious that this was not going to make them any money. They had sent a mining engineer out to Parrott City to do a survey for them. He reported back to the Parrott brothers that he thought it was a failure, and so they withdrew their funding. Let's go to the next slide quickly. And here's a piece of letterhead showing this is letterhead for La Plata County for the county clerk. And again, this is it shows Parrott City there, July 25th, 1879. Let's go to the next slide. Do we have the next slide or? Oh, okay. Okay, here we go. This is the full page of that piece of stationery, and it's a correspondence between the county clerk of La Plata County with the county clerk of San Juan County. And there were outstanding debts when San Juan County was created, and they were supposed to split the debts between San Juan County and La Plata County in 1876, and they were still fighting about who was going to pay the outstanding debts in 1879, and that's what this letter is about. Let's go to the next slide. We've got an overlap in slides there. Okay, anyway, okay, here we go. Here is a little news note that appeared in several Colorado newspapers in January of 1880. It says Silver World. John Moss, who represented La Plata County in the first state legislature and occupied his seat 2 days during the session of 120 days, died in California a few days ago from a wound received in a fight with Indians. Well, this is the only death notice. This appeared in the Rocky Mountain News and several other Colorado newspapers in May of 1880. He had actually died in January of 1880. So a little explanation here. It makes it sound like he had a fresh wound from some fight with Indians. Well, it turns out he had an old wound from years before that he had received in some type of shootout with Indians, and he was carrying a slug probably in his lung, and it bothered him quite a bit, and that might have been the reason that he drank a lot. He was known to tip a few, and they said that when he went to Denver, he preferred the saloon over the legislature. So anyway, he dies in California. He's buried by his Masonic brothers in San Francisco. We don't know where he was buried. Probably records were lost in the great earthquake in San Francisco. But anyway, he ends up dying in 1880. Let's go to the next slide just real quick. Here's another view from the Emil Fisher map. Again, it shows the La Plata Mountains, La Plata River. Let's go to the next slide. This is a little detail from that Emil Fisher map, and this is what we're going to get into in the second half of this talk. This is a list of mines that or claims that existed in 1893 when Emil Fisher drew this map. And this shows the La Plata Mountain District, or the California Mining District. The name was used interchangeably. And by 1893, there were already 82 active claims in the La Plata Mountains. And some of the more famous, you've probably heard of the Neglected Mine and so forth. And so we're going to get into that in the next segment. So I'm going to shut up now. I've run over my time. And again, thank you for taking your time to listen today.
Oh, that was great. Thanks, Charlie. But as you see, this is a huge story that did a lot to talk about in a short period of time. Do we have any questions? Again, you can either type them in the Q&A or raise your hand, and I will let you speak if you'd like to and ask Charlie a question. We got a comment. Thanks, Charlie. Great research. Thanks, Jan. You know, if you do think of a question, then you can always send us an email at info@animusmuseum.org. Thanks, Don. You have a question about the maps and photos. The map is actually available for purchase in the museum. It's $3.95 plus tax. So you can certainly do that. When we send out the link tomorrow for the recording, we're also on that webpage going to have a list of all the resources that Charlie used to come up with this presentation, to research, and some better pictures of the maps. So you'll see them there. All the books that he's used are in our research library. So if you are interested in learning more about the resources that Charlie was able to access, give us a call, set up an appointment, and we can pull them and have them available in our research library for you. So hope that answers that question. The next session is going to be, thank you, Daniel, on April 9th at 1 p.m. If you haven't done so already, you can register again from our website. You do need to register separately, and I'll try to put a link in the email that goes out tomorrow. And it will get into more detail. Is that right, Charlie, about mining in the La Plata Mountains?
Yes, and we'll try to sort of take it up almost to World War II.
All right.
Which is a lot of ground to cover. But there's not a lot of production records for these very early years, but in what we're going to cover next time, we actually have production records that estimate tonnage of production for various minerals and so forth. So people, I think, will be interested in that.
Okay, we got a question from Nona. Are there any records whether much gold was found in those early years?
There was not. That's why the Parrott brothers pulled out after they sent their mining engineer to investigate. He wrote a formal report to them that said he did not believe that this operation was ever going to pay for itself. So there wasn't much found in the very early years, just enough to create an excitement.
Well, the one thing that everybody always lies about, mining results.
Right. Especially when you're trying to make money.
Right. Any other questions? I don't see any hands raised. Any questions? Okay, quick, again, next month, we're going to present part 2, April 9th at 1 p.m. It will be recorded, and on that page where the recordings are going to be, we're also going to have a list of the resources and some better pictures of that, close-ups of the Emil Fisher map, which is available here at the museum. The museum is open Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays from 10 a.m. till 3 p.m. So come on by. At present, there's no charge for admission. We're just living on donations these days. So even if you only have a few minutes, come on by, say hi, ask a question, and check out our newly restored map of 1910 Durango that is now hanging up in the classroom that we're really excited about. The big thing, mark your calendars, and we'll send more information out on Facebook and Instagram and an e-blast. Everybody is invited to our anniversary celebration open house on Saturday, March 26th. Drop in between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m., say hello, check out the museum, enjoy some refreshments, and we really hope that you'll come by and we'll see you then. And finally, if you'd like to continue this type of programming in the future, please become a member. This is membership month here at the La Plata County Historical Society. You can drop by the museum for details or check out our website that has all the information on how to become a member, and you can actually join from our website. And of course, there's a donate button on our website, and we appreciate all of your donations and support. So if there's nothing else, I want to thank Charlie, and we'll see you next month. So thanks for joining us today. Goodbye, everybody.